I'm going to give you a little fun fact about my sister Leslie. Her favorite pastry, I don't know if you all are familiar, they're called chocolate cigars or horns, chocolate horns. And every single year I go to Shalom's in Silver Spring, meet up with the bakery guy. He knows me and he said, oh, okay, you're here because you're coming for the chocolate horns. I get my sister a dozen chocolate horns. I mail them out and she has to hide them because her family ends up finding them. And she claims that she cannot find them anywhere in California. So I don't know. So anyway, and one time I got on the plane with 200 chocolate horns for her son's bar mitzvah. That was me, the good sister. So anyway, this story has been a family project, and Leslie has captured history through my mother and my mother's family. So Leslie, can you give us a summary of the Newark Minutemen? Can you tell us about the setting of the story?
Sure, and thank you all so much for having me. I launched this, I actually launched the ebook earlier than expected. It was last April that my publisher called and said, you know, we have this pandemic and everybody's shut in. Would you like to launch your ebook early? And I said, sure, why not? I had no idea what I was getting into because there are no bookstores open and everything. So anyway, for the past year, I've been doing all these virtual book talks at JCCs and synagogues and libraries and bookstores and so forth. But I have to say that my greatest honor is this one today with my sister interviewing with me. So I wrote this book, Newark Minutemen, and it's been really it's been a lost part of American history, and it's felt great adding this lost part of history that is directly tied to the rise of fascism that was going on in our country before World War II. So during the Great Depression. And so it's added to our American history and our Holocaust history. And it goes into what America knew what was going on here about the Nazi threat before a lot of people were willing to admit it or ignoring it or whatever they were doing. So I've just published this book, Newark Minutemen, and as Melissa said, it's planned to be developed into a movie. And so it is a historical romance, and it's based on our family true story that, as Donna said, my mom helped me research. So this book is a mix of this violence and unrest that was going on during this time. And but I didn't want it to be just this empty, like, violent story. So it's a mix of this action and drama with this romance that's layered over, and also a lot that keeps you on edge. So I'm going to do something fancy today. My daughter actually just wrote a song for the audio trailer. So I'm going to play that so that you all, it'll give you like a 2-minute idea of what this book is about. So I'm going to jump in.
But she not only wrote it, she's singing.
Yes. She's performing it as well as she wrote it. Donna always corrects me.
I know.
Okay, so I'm going to share this. Oops. Bigger.
And Lord gets red clear, that was bursting in there. Hebrew tonight, where the flag was still till there's nothing left inside. Spiders marching through, I hear they're coming soon. But I never have to fear, you're the angel in the room. Just don't close your eyes to the black and blue tonight. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. Just free your mind, at the end we'll see the light. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. With fire in our hearts, we bid farewell to once. But we are who we are, it's not written in the stars. Just don't close your eyes to the black and blue tonight. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. Just free your mind, at the end we'll see the light. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. 37, are we ever coming home? Straight from heaven, I will never let you go. 37, are we ever coming home? Straight from heaven, I will never let you go. Just don't close your eyes to the black and blue tonight. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives. Just free your mind, at the end we'll see the light. We're fighting for our love, but we're running for our lives.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you, thank you. So hopefully that gave you a sense that this is a love story, and it is this star-crossed love story that's doomed for failure. It's sort of a Romeo and Juliet, or like a Jack and Rose Titanic type story. It is set in New Jersey during the Great Depression in the 1930s, across this little known or unknown historical background to many, that was the rising German-American Nazi Party in America, right here on American soil. And what I tried to do was offer this sort of dramatic perspective of one of the biggest untold stories leading up to World War II. And when writing it, I actually discovered this portrait of the American 1930s that really revealed a lot of what was going on in America and America's responses to fascism.
Thank you. That was great, Leslie. Okay, so the next question is, the way you wrote the story, it was through four narrators. Why did you approach it that way?
Well, maybe should I talk about the setting first?
Oh, I thought you did talk about the setting.
No, I didn't talk about the setting.
Okay, talk about the setting. Will you talk about the setting?
Set up a little bit, yeah. So, so I touched on the setting. So, as I said, the setting was Great Depression, 1930s, which was a very fertile ground for alternatives to democracy, because we had sort of this triple threat going on. We had this economic crisis that we were just coming out of, the crash of 1929. We were in the Great Depression, lasted a lot longer than we thought. We had these aggressive dictators over in Europe, and we had a divided country, a divided America. And so Americans at the time were looking for alternatives to this hopelessness that they felt. And so they were looking left and right. And you had this, you know, on the left, you had a communism cropping up and coming in, and people thinking, well, maybe that's the solution. You had FDR proposing what was pretty much socialism back then, where the country was going to pay for everything, get everybody back to work. And then, of course, on the extreme right, you had fascism. And in this great divide, what happened was this shadow party, which was this Hitler satellite called the German-American Bund, started taking advantage. And so this story is about this forgotten, about the forgotten resistance fighters that were actually organized by the Jewish mob and our government to defend our country against this threat.
That's good. All right. Now the next question is, you had four narrators in the book. Why did you decide to approach it that way?
So, so it's really interesting. A lot of my editors, and even people who were reading this at the time, they really fought me on doing this through four narrators. They're like, "This is your first completed novel. It's going to be too aggressive." But what I had was, so this story, it follows this this Jewish boxer. His name is Yael, and he's part of a group of boxers called the Newark Minutemen that was organized by the Jewish mafia and our government to go up against this Bund. And then Yael goes undercover for the resistance in New Jersey, and along the way he falls in love with the daughter of the enemy. So as you can imagine, you've got this relationship which has all this conflict, Jewish boxer, daughter of American Bund leader, mapped over this backdrop of incredible conflict. And so what I wanted to do was create both perspectives, because back then people were so confused what the answer was. And I wanted the reader to have empathy for both sides. Because really, if you think about it, on one side you have the mob, the Jewish mob, and they're kind of bad guys. And on the other side, you have the American Nazis, and we know the punchline there, but they're bad guys too. And so the four narrators are the hero and heroine, Yael and Krista, and then also the head of the mob, his name is Longies Willman, and the head of the German-American Bund, his name is Führer Fritz Kuhn. And so I wanted you to share the fears that were going on each side, and the wickedness on each side, and also the kindness on each side. And I wanted, through these four eyes, for the reader to then be able to examine why America closed our eyes to this satellite that Hitler was building in America for his empire. So I think especially with the heroine, hopefully I sort of gave this perspective, like, why would back then somebody think about being a Nazi or embracing Nazism? And you can see, I've tried, especially with her, to show how torn she was, because she was a young girl. That's how she grew up. But then all of a sudden she meets this guy, starts opening her eyes. And then Yael, who goes undercover, he also, and becomes very good friends with some of these guys that he's undercover with. He goes undercover and trains to be part of this inner circle. And so he becomes very, torn to and questioning. So you have this story that's been buried, and we'd certainly be living a different kind of story if it had come true. But that's why I took that approach.
Okay. And how did you get the idea for Newark Minutemen?
Well, it really came about 5 years ago. Our mom is 95 right now, and 5 years ago was her 90th birthday. And my sisters and I said, okay, our goal was to get 90 people there. And so we rounded up all of her old friends and cousins and relatives. And so here they all are in this big party. And so first of all, my mom, she grew up in Newark. She was the daughter of immigrants who came over from Russia, from, horrible times. And she had 4 older brothers. And so all of our life, and Donna can attest to this, and if any of you've met my mom, she talks a lot. She told us these stories of growing up. And okay, so she was born in 1925. So of course she told us stories about the Great Depression and World War II. We had a cousin who escaped Auschwitz, 3 pandemics. But then her cousins and her started talking about my Uncle Harry, her older brother. And so he was a prize fighting boxer. And we always knew that growing up, because we saw he had like a trophy and there's a newspaper article and everything. But then they started saying, Esther, remember when Harry would come home like at 3 o'clock in the morning and your mom would yell at him for being out beating up the Nazis? And I'm like I kind of did a double take. And I'm like, well, what do you mean beating up the Nazis? You mean when he was in the war? Because he was in the war. He was a militant police in the war. I said, when he was doing that? And they're like, no. Right in New Jersey, there are all this Nazi group called the German-American Bund. And so my cousin and I, we became possessed with understanding this story. And I started researching it, and I uncovered all of these FBI documents. Like I read through like thousands of pages that have just relatively recently been unsealed, like in the past 10 years. And we interviewed some of my mom's cousins, and then I found this great, one of the best things I found was a couple of years earlier than when my book takes place, there were these 2 brothers in Chicago. They were called the Metcalf brothers. One was a newspaper man, the other one worked for the FBI. And they went undercover for 6 months for the Chicago Daily News. And they got into the inner circle and found out all the stuff that was going on with the German-American Bund. And then after those 6 months, they wrote a 14-day series for the Times about what was going on at the time. And I found out about that, but what was really interesting was I was on Ancestry, and one of the ways I develop my historical characters is I create their family trees on Ancestry. So I created the family tree of these brothers, and so I'm researching and everything. I don't know if you all have ever used Ancestry, but it starts connecting in clues. And at the very bottom of one of the pages, in like mice type, it said my father, John Metcalf's diaries are at the Hoover Institute. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And the Hoover Institute is right near me at Stanford. And I said, I'm going to go check this out. And I became a member. And is that sun getting on me a little bit, huh? I became a member, and I went to the Hoover Institute, and it was unbelievable. I found 12 boxes of his diaries, of his handwritten diaries about his experience being undercover for the Bund. And in fact, one of the scenes in my book is when the hero, Yael, is initiated into this inner circle. It was called the OD, and it's like the SS of the German Nazi inner circle. And John Metcalf was initiated, And so I actually took the scene of the initiation and translated it into the book. So that if you all read the book, the initiation that I write about is the real true way of how they were initiated. And I actually tracked down John's son, who's in his 80s now. He lives in Hollywood, California. We're like best friends. We had lots of discussions, and he gave me permission to print all that. So anyway, I found all this incredible information, and I was just shocked at that period of time. And I want to show you this video.
Wait, Leslie, excuse me. The sun, we can't see. Can you turn your?
Is that better?
That's better. Yeah, that's keep going. Can you? Now there's a big blue line.
That's weird.
Okay. Yeah.
That's good, right?
Perfect. Yep.
All right. So thank goodness I have my sister.
I know.
So, okay, so I'm going to show you this video, and just to set it up, some of you may have seen it before, but it's taken from real footage, and you can actually go online, and I'm just going to show you a clip. You can actually go online and see there's tons of real footage. So this footage was 1939, George Washington's birthday, before they called it President's Day. It was George Washington's birthday, 6 months before Hitler invades Poland, right? So this is before the war. It takes place in Madison Square Garden. And this, when I saw this, I was chilled, and I said, I've got to capture this story. So I'm going to share my screen again. And so let me just make this bigger. So this is my website, and I can give that to you later on. It's got all kinds of clips and talks and stuff on it, but also on it, and it's got lots of really great, these are all images from America at the time, unbelievably, in the 1930s. But what I want to show you, oh, and that's my Uncle Harry winning the Golden Glove. So what I want to show you, here we go. Here's this clip, and I'm just going to run just a little bit of it.
February 20th, 1939. Just months before Hitler invades Poland and ignites the deadliest war in history, thousands of Nazis gather for a rally at an indoor arena. But this isn't Nuremberg or Berlin. This is Madison Square Garden in New York City.
You all have heard of me through the Jewish-controlled press.
And the man speaking isn't a member of Adolf Hitler's inner circle. He's Fritz Julius Kuhn, a U.S. citizen and head of the German-American Bund, or association.
Kuhn wanted a rally to celebrate George Washington's birthday. The first American fascist is what they called him. They signed a contract with Madison Square Garden. Said, okay, we agree. No swastikas, no anti-Semitic signs, none of that stuff. Of course, once the contracts were signed, those agreements went out the window.
This program was produced for the German-American Bund rally.
We love him for the enemies he has made. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Fritz Kuhn.
Kuhn then went on to deliver a very, very predictable and very, very typical National Socialist stump speech about racism and the Jewish conspiracy and the communists and how everybody's an enemy and everybody has to be alike.
We, the German-American Bund, organized as American citizens with American ideals and determined to protect ourselves, our homes, our wives and children against the slimy conspirators and the parasite pen of Jewish communism in our schools, our universities, our very homes.
Then, an unemployed
Oops, there we go. So I don't know if any of you all have ever seen that clip before or that footage, but I was like, I couldn't believe that was going on in our country again, before the war even started. So it's interesting when you watch that. So what you're seeing there is this guy who everybody called the American Führer. His name was Fritz Kuhn. And what he did was he divided our country into three, and he created this whole hierarchy, just like in Germany. There's a German word for it, where everybody reports up, and each person above has the authority, with the Führer being at the top. And underneath, all across our country, there were these thousands of cells of groups of people training, preparing, wearing smuggled in Nazi uniforms. They would actually go to our NRA at the time, was giving away guns. They would get guns from our NRA for free. They would train our National Guard. Actually, you could go to them for training as well, although this group also had there were a lot of former World War I officers that were also part of the training portion. And so what Fritz Kuhn did, he did two things that were really brilliant. One was he wrapped all this, let's call it Nazi idealism, or the idealism that Hitler was talking about, in the idea of Americanism. You probably saw some of that. And at the end of that Madison Square Garden, they actually sang the Star-Spangled Banner. And so they would say, we're going to get rid of all the Jews and Blacks and homosexuals and be true Americans again. And so that was one thing he did that was really brilliant. The other thing he did that was really brilliant was he divided this organization up into, he turned it into a corporation, and he divided it up into six kind of companies. So one was the where they were training people. One was a newspaper, and they had several others. And one was it was a real estate company, and they went around the country, and almost in every, well, it couldn't be every state, but half our country, they bought real estate and turned them into Nazi youth camps. And there are three in New Jersey. I don't know where you all are from, but there are three in New Jersey and one famous one in Long Island. And some of those are featured in the book. So the question, anyway, so you've got this underground group, so organized, with a charismatic leader, building, some people called it the fifth column after they looked back at it. Some people called it, they were seeding America. They were taking pictures of our coastlines. They were doing preparation. And so you can make your assumption as to, where that was going. And they were also, that day that you just saw at Madison Square Garden, where he filled the garden, and there were hundreds of thousands of demonstrators outside, but he called that Der Tag. And that was the day that they were basically going to have a Nazi party and find a candidate for president. And Charles Lindbergh was the candidate. I don't know how many of you all have seen Plot Against America, but I always tell people that this is sort of the prequel to that. And if this had happened, that would have been a true story. So that's sort of the background.
So why or how do you think, why did the government allow this to happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So at the time, as I said, we were a very divided country. And I forget what the number was. It was something like 80% of the people did not want to go into another war after just being fresh out of World War I. So a lot of people were sort of putting their heads in the sand, but the bigger reason was because of First Amendment rights. And our government couldn't do anything when these guys are marching right down our avenues. I mean, I don't know. So maybe I can show you a closer picture, but this is the cover of the book, and the cover of the book, I don't know if you can see it, but this is, this is a Fifth Avenue, and you've got these guys dressed up in the Hitler uniforms with the Nazi flag and the American flag. So they're marching down every American street and with their hands in the air, and all these newspapers, but because of First Amendment rights, we couldn't do anything. So, so what happened was our government knew it was a threat and they knew it was a problem. So, okay, who had the power in the country in the 30s? Well, if you remember what happened in 1929, stock market crashes, everybody loses their money, except who? The mafia. The mob, the Jewish and the Italian mob. And so they've got the cash, which means they have the power and the connections. So our government went to the head of the Jewish mob, Meyer Lansky, and they said, look, we need your help and we'll pay you. And Meyer Lansky said, you don't need to pay me, that's okay. You just look the other way and we'll take care of it, but you can't do anything. So so Meyer went to his buddy in Newark, Longy's Willman, he was the head of the mob in Newark, a very powerful mobster because that's where the waterfront was, but a very lovable mobster, actually. My mom talks about him and the cousins talk about him as a Robin Hood, and there's all kinds of stories about how everybody loved Longy. So he went to Longy because Longy ran the boxers, because the boxers were gambling. That was all, the whole gambling infrastructure. And so he went to his boxers and he brought in this veteran boxer called Nat Arno. And he said, Nat, I want you to train these boxers to come at a minute's notice. And here's what they need to be prepared to do. And so they recruited all these boxers. They paid them $100 each time they came, and they would have them go out and be like a resistance. So they'd go out, they'd break up some of these meetings, they'd spy, they'd go undercover. And so our Uncle Harry was a Newark Minuteman. And in fact, since I've written this book and it's gotten known and talked about it, it's amazing how many people have come out to me and said, oh my gosh, my dad, my uncle, my grandfather, they were a Newark Minuteman. And I've gotten to be friends with two women in particular that their fathers happen to be two of my featured boxers in my story. So that's been really great. And in fact, I have on my website, I have a gallery, and I always tell people, if your uncle, if he was a boxer in Newark, and maybe even if he was Jewish, 18 to 25-year-old in Newark, he was probably a Newark Minuteman. And there were in other cities too, by the way, but the Newark ones were the most organized.
All right. So now many people, as some of you may be very surprised to have never heard about this. Why was this event buried in American history?
Well, it still perplexes me why, but I have some theories, and I've asked a lot of people why they think nobody knew this, or why. I know we didn't learn about it in high school. I don't know if any of you did. My kids didn't. So one answer that always comes up is, well, World War II sort of overshadowed anything that sort of happened in America. But I don't know. I don't buy that, because I do think these were the seeds to Nazism in America. And was a very key time. And I think one of the reasons that it actually sort of became so big in the 30s was because you did have all these fractured groups in the 20s that were extremist groups, especially in America. But what really brought it together in the 30s was radio. And all of a sudden you had these radio influencers, if you will, that were talking about one message. There weren't very many radio stations, so they would have millions of followers. And so anyway, I don't buy that so much. I guess what the one reason I maybe am settled with is that, it was kind of a secret. I mean, these were the mob, and it was the government that approached the mob. And really, the only place you really find the story of the Newark Minutemen is you can find a couple little articles. And I found like a couple that said Nat Arno was arrested last night as a Newark Minuteman, and because this one tried to shoot this one and all that. So you can find a couple of those, but 3, 4, 5 maybe little tiny things, but they're all anecdotes. And one thing my cousin actually helped me do was, so my mom went to the high school, the Jewish high school, big Jewish high school there, Weequahic High School. I don't know if any of you guys went, or your parents or your grandparents, but that's the big Jewish Newark high school. And they have a huge alumni network. And so my cousin went on to the alumni network because he went there as well. And he asked the question, he said, were any of your parents or uncles or anybody you knew Newark Minutemen? And if they were, can you send us stories? So we got all these stories about the Newark Minutemen. And then the other resource that I got was I've become, in addition to Newark Minutemen people, sons and daughters reaching out, the other people that have reached out to me are the sons and daughters of the mafia. So I've also gotten stories from them. So in fact, I just talked to Meyer. Well, I've become friends with Meyer Lansky too. He's the grandson of Meyer Lansky, and he's going to try to get me a talk in Las Vegas because he lives in Las Vegas. But hey, don't bother me because I have this whole.
You'll break your knees.
I'll break your knees. So yeah, I don't have a straight answer, but that's my theory, that it was kind of secret.
Okay. You touched upon the Nazi youth camps, and you mentioned that they were all over the country, 3 in New Jersey, 1 in Yabank, New York, if I'm pronouncing that right. Can you talk more about the Nazi youth camps and what actually they did there?
Yeah, I mean, while there are a handful of people that know about the German-American Bund and Fritz Kuhn, barely any people know about the Nazi youth camps. And in fact, so this is featured in my story as well. It came out in the FBI documents that this one girl, who actually my heroine is sort of based on, that she was raped in the camps, and many of the girls were raped there in order to increase the Aryan population in the United States. So what you had going on was, again, you had these, and the reason I think it touched me, and probably maybe I think it touched Donna the most and other people, is that these were children who were doing what their parents said. They were going to their camps, their summer camps. They couldn't speak English, could only speak German, learned all the propaganda. Mein Kampf was one of the main books. They learned maneuvers, they learned to shoot. Once the boy turned 18 at camp, he had to sign, this is an American, a German-American, he had to sign up for the Nazi army. they had a boat that was offshore there. They'd have to go out and register for the Nazi army. So I did find, so on my website, again, I have lots of little videos and pictures and stuff. And some of the videos were actually home movies that the FBI, again, maybe in the past 10, 15 years, just released these home videos. But I have this one that it's actually a high school boy, I think, put this one together that does it quickly for this purpose, takes you quickly through. And I just want you to see how you know, this mirrored what was going on in Germany. So let me share my screen one last time. And I'll just show a little bit of this.
The year is 1939. Uniformed children raise pro-Nazi flags to honor their Führer. Images of Adolf Hitler and the swastika flood the streets. Citizens rally, saluting Hitler and paying their respect to their homeland. Although these scenes appear straight from 1930s Berlin, they occurred not in Germany, but in New Jersey, Los Angeles, and New York City. These activities symbolize the German-American Bund's efforts to stand up for their homeland, halt anti-German sentiments in America, and organize a pro-Nazi alliance. Ironically, the Bund's efforts to strengthen German ideology.
Well, I guess there wasn't as much camp stuff as I'd wanted. Let me show you one other thing here. Let's see. Oops. Where's a good picture? I think oops. Let's see, sorry. Oh no, that was going down the street. Well, that was at one of the camps. That was at one of the camps.
We can't see it.
Oh, you can't?
No.
All right. Well, okay. I guess you guys will have to go look at my website, because when you see these kids holding the American and German flags, it's just, you know, it's like, how could this really have happened? But, and as I said, there's all kinds of little clips on there. They're just long and slow and silent. So I think it's better if you're interested to go, you can check them out.
So we'd like to now open the floor up. If anyone has any questions, you can unmute yourself. Would anyone like to ask? Okay, go ahead.
Hi, you are the writer, author of the book. Are you also the screenwriter for the movie?
Well, yes, actually, well, let me see how to answer that. So I actually wrote the screenplay before I wrote the book.
Oh.
And we come a little bit more from that world out here. We know some people in that business, and I had this idea, I wrote it up, and I partnered with a friend of mine, and she said, you need an IP, we need a screenplay. And I'd never written a screenplay before, and I'm like, fine. And I Googled Titanic, and I followed the romance of Titanic, and I wrote this screenplay with a lot of help. And so the way Hollywood works is, so I sold the screenplay, I kept the book rights, but I sold the screenplay, and then what happens is, because I'm not part of the union or any of that, then my producer, so my producer is Fulwell 73, and there are these 4 guys over in the UK, and their 5th partner is James Corden, who does the Late Late Show, and they also partnered with another big movie company. So once you sell your idea, everybody wants to make it their own. And so it was announced in Variety magazine, which is the trade magazine, and they announced who the writers were. So right now we have these 2 writers attached. We sort of have a director attached, but because of COVID, his movie just got moved till next February, which means he's contractually can't do anything until then. So we're trying to decide whether we stick with him. I have a couple meetings tomorrow, but anyway, anybody who takes this movie is going to change it and make it their own. And so in fact, because I kept the book rights, I said, and I knew this was stretching out in certain terms of time, that's when I decided to write the book. I hadn't intended to write the book, but I decided to write the book, and luckily found a publisher who was willing to do it without the movie rights. So that's, and the way the union works, I don't know if any of you all are familiar, but I think if they keep, so I'll get a story by credit. So it'll say, I'll get an executive producer and story by. And I think the rule is something like if they keep like 25% of your story, then you get the written by credit as well. So we'll see.
Okay. I have a few things from the chat. First of all, Tina said, Leslie, so glad you brought this dark period in our history to light. One way to prevent it from happening again and not letting people say it can't happen in our country. And then Gary Goldberg, please ask if the name Jake Skuratowski came up in your research.
I know Jake's son. That's in fact, so Jake, Donna, Jake is Mohawk, right? It wasn't, did they call him Mohawk? Who asked that question? Melissa, who asked that question?
It says Gary Goldberg.
Gary. So they used to call Jake.
What is Gary doing?
What?
Yes, that's right. He was called Mohawk, and there's a whole family history that I could discuss with you one day about him.
So he lived, Donna, he lived like 3 doors down from Mom on
Hawthorne Avenue?
Not Hawthorne, the other one, Nye Avenue. And he was friends with Uncle Marty, and he'd come by and pick up Uncle Marty, and then they'd go over to his, what do you want to call it, behind the candy store.
And our Uncle Marty was a very big gambler. It was my mother's brother, one of her brothers, very big gambler.
Well,
And
Jake was an amazing guy.
Yeah, I talked to Jake's son. He lives in California, right?
I don't know, but if you could give me that contact, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely. So whoever, if you can connect Gary and I after, I would be happy to.
Okay, so, thank you.
And then, okay, so he tells a funny story. Mohawk's son told me, Donna will be more interested than anyone else, but so Donna, so my mom's cousin, was Longy's Willman and all the gangsters' barber. And so his son told me this whole story about my cousin's son got really sick and they called the doctor. Anyway, it's so funny. I guess my point, it's so funny how they all knew each other. They all lived on the same street. They all still know each other. But yeah, Mohawk was famous in our family.
Okay,
thank you.
I have a question. One more thing from the chat. Paula asked if you know where the Long Island camp was.
Yes, Yap Hank, Long Island. And I think there's still remnants. There are still remnants of some of the camps. I believe there's still remnants of this. Not only was there a camp there, but there was a whole community. And literally, when you were to turn in this community, there'd be a sign, it was private, and the streets were all named Hitler Avenue, Goebel Street,
Mm.
And that town, there's some crazy thing about it and ownership. I think even that still goes on today, but it was called Yaphank, Long Island.
Good question.
Go ahead, Celia.
Oh,
Cecilia.
thank you. I have two questions actually about the camps, for the youth camps. You said that the young people were German and were they of German origin, these kids or these youths, or were they American kids being converted to just the German culture?
Yes, so they were mostly children of German immigrants. Now, there was a rule, and it changed in 1936, where in order to be part of the German-American Bund, you had to at least have applied for your citizenship. So were some of them, Germans here illegally, maybe, but in general, they were children of German parents, so German-American children.
Who sympathized obviously with the Nazi cause.
Exactly.
Okay.
And obviously it wasn't all Germans, right, that did this. It was, they were part of the Bund, and people argue about how many real members were part of the Bund. And I've seen such a range, but at Madison Square Garden, that's at least 25,000 right there in New York. And then of course, there's going to be more than that all across the country. And then there are other fascist groups. And like I said, because of radio and other things, they were trying to join all of the fascist groups, whether it was Italian or German-American Bund, these extremist groups, under this movement.
I couldn't help but notice in the subtitle of one of the things you showed, it had in italics, "Make America Great."
Right.
I mean, this is so timely and so frighteningly timely, as we all know, without me explaining it. It's obvious that the time is sometimes just too ripe, for these kind of things to happen, which is why Nazism came to power when it did. Did. Are you aware, one more question, and I really, one more question. I'm sorry, did I get taken off because I talked too much?
No. You're a guest of honor. You know everybody. Go ahead.
Okay, well, anyway, Leslie, it's just fascinating. My parents are Holocaust survivors, so I'm particularly interested in all these kind of books and studies. This has been a fascinating thing, but a friend of mine just gave me a book called Nazis in Los Angeles by Stephen Ross. Are you familiar with it?
I am. There's actually two of those books. One's called, what one is that one called? Nazis
in Los Angeles.
Okay, so there's also one called Nazis in Hollywood or something like that.
Or maybe, yeah.
And there are two writers that came out with these books. Interestingly enough, my daughter goes to Cal State Northridge, and they have an incredible library there for Jewish history. And both of those authors found the materials for that. And for everybody, so you will know, that was what was going on the West Coast. And what was going on in the West Coast was there was a group of German extremists, German-American Nazis that wanted to assassinate the Warner Brothers, Charlie Chaplin, all of the Jewish studio heads, as well as I think the president was on there too. And there was this whole plan. And then this guy, a Jewish guy, went undercover. And what he did was he confused, if I'm right, I actually went to one of these speakers' things, but he confused everybody as to how to do it. And I haven't read the whole book, just parts of it, but did you read it, Celia?
I actually didn't even read it yet. She said it's really very complex and detailed and almost like reading an encyclopedia. But what I thought was really amazing is I realized that the person who wrote it, Stephen Ross, he's a professor. He is my mother's friend who's a survivor. He's a survivor's son and a brilliant guy who teaches in one of the big universities. Yes. Yeah, and Stephen Ross is my mother's friend's son.
Okay, so will you introduce me?
Well, I would if I know his mother, but I don't know him. So,
Okay.
but I would, it's a certainly interesting connection and
Yes.
fascinating.
yes.
And I heard all those stories as well. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
I want to ask a question, if possible.
Well, I think Beth was raising her hand for a long time, and then we'll
Well,
go back to you.
I pretty much was gonna ask what Cecilia just said. If there was, to your knowledge, any connection basically between the bond and the existing groups that are now rearing their ugly heads with all this anti-American.
It's a great question. And I don't think there are any direct connection because that was Hitler's, that was his expansion plan. But what I will say is that in my research, and it's funny, I think I had a talk the day of the insurrection, and I knew I was going to get this question, and I knew it was going to be like, I'm going to really have to explain it. And so I went on and I researched, and unfortunately, I don't think I put my computer on privacy, but I actually went on one of these blogs of these extremist organizations because I really wanted to understand it deeply. And I wanted to find out the answer to your question is, are they believing the same, is this the same belief? So the short answer is yes, but two things that I discovered. One is they're doing it a lot more slickly. They're very intelligent. And this guy that was talking was basically saying, you know, we can't wear certain things and have certain symbols. What we need to do is wear suits and ties and pass certain laws. So, but saying the same thing, but to make sure that the white, you know, that the whites stay in control of the world. And but the real bottom line that I took away was what's similar is the fear. So the fear, why, you know, what is it? Let's just talk about America for a second. What is the fear here that why does this group exist? What is their fear? So like your knee-jerk reaction is kind of, oh, you know, they're afraid of losing their jobs and immigration and all that's kind of right. But the real fear that's the same as back then is they have a fear that the white race is going to literally become extinct, like an animal would become extinct. And they call it the white replacement theory. And it's kind of a hard one to, like, you as a leader, you can't just say like, oh, well, don't worry, we'll give you jobs too, because it's this deep, deep fear of, you know, everybody's mixing and all that kind of stuff. But they really, truly believe that the white race is going away.
Dahlia, did you want to ask?
I wanted to ask, can you explain the name of the Jewish boxer, the hero?
Sure, Yael.
So is it based on the real name or is it something you made up? And what does it mean?
Great question. So I'll say it, I'll answer your question a little bit even broader because a lot of people ask me what's true, what's fictionalized. So I always say about 85, like, first of all, my goal was to make this as an authentic story as possible and as true a story. And obviously I did all this research and I really thought it was a missing part of history. So obviously, you know, the Longy is true, the gangster, Fritz Kuhn is true, the boxers are true. I even have cameos of Mayor LaGuardia and Frank Sinatra and all these other cameos of real people. The two fictionalized people, but they're based on real people, are, oh, and let me make clear too. So my Uncle Harry, I make the best friend of Yael. So Yael is the hero. And I did that because I wanted there to be a consistency of the story and a sort of a grounding of the story. So I kept him, he's obviously our uncle. So Yael is I mentioned these two brothers in Chicago. So Yael is based on the experiences of John and James Metcalf. And the love story is fictionalized, and Krista, who is the love interest, she is based on this girl, Helen Vrurus, who was the one in the Nazi youth camp who went and testified for the FBI. So even those characters who are fictionalized, they're based on real experiences and characters. And I think I also mentioned what I did was I went on Ancestry and created these families, so I knew sort of where they lived and what they looked like and who their families were and what their jobs were. And so again, my goal, and I'll add, I spent like 2 years talking to my mom almost every single day, trying to get every little detail about, how'd you take the trash out and what was it like going and shopping for the chicken with your mom and all of that. And so I was trying to make it as authentic as possible. And my mom was very sad when it was over because she said, "Does this mean we're not going to talk anymore?"
So does Yael have a meaning? Is it a Jewish name or?
It is a Jewish name.
It has a meaning?
It doesn't have a meaning. It was a name I like, but I'm going to tell you a really weird story. And this was so not planned. So there's this one scene in the book where Uncle Harry, and my mom is a character as well, their mother, so Longy walks into their house and their mother says, "Longy, I want to play the numbers," right? And she gives him a number. So, back then it was like a lottery thing. And she gives him these numbers. And I'm like, oh, I wanted to make the numbers special. In my book, there are a lot of little hidden things like that. So I don't know if any of you all know it. I don't even know if I'm going to say it right. Gematria.
Yes, every letter has a number.
Right. So it's the
value.
For those of you who don't know, it's you take like letters, a name,
yes.
It translates to a number,
Yeah.
and then you see what other names that number also maps to, right? And I am not making this up. This is so true. This is after I have all the characters. I type in Yael. So I said, oh, I'll just type in Yael and I'll put those numbers as the numbers that she chooses. Well, guess what? Number one, and I will prove this to you if you don't believe me, the number one thing it came up with, Make America Great.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Unbelievable.
And I was like, that was meant to be, that was his name. I will send you all a picture of that if you don't believe me. I was shocked.
Amazing. So how long did it take you to write the book in comparison with writing the script for the movie?
Yeah, so the way a screenplay works, so figure so 5 years ago, my mom was 90, and then I started researching. So for a screenplay, the way it works is it's 1 page per minute. So if you have a 90-minute screenplay, it's going to be 90 pages, right? Which isn't that much. And if any of you have seen a screenplay, it's pretty slim. So, so I wrote the screen after the research. Now the research was, probably the toughest part, but after the research, I don't know, I had the timeline, I created the timeline. I knew my love story was going to be the arc of like the Titanic type love story. So that didn't take me that long. I mean, I had a lot of editors work with me. So, maybe that all took about a year after the research. And then for the book, I thought, oh, no problem. I'm going to bang out this book. But that was a lot harder than I thought, because a screenplay, the way you write it is you're showing everything. He picked up the glass and put it on the table. And when I translated it over, everybody would say, that sounds like a screenplay. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I don't get it. I think Donna did that a lot. And so finally, because, you know, in a book, you do what people are thinking and what's around and all that. So finally, this editor said to me that I was working with, she said, go get Hunger Games. I want you to read the first page of Hunger Games. And I read it and it was first person and she was thinking, I'm like, oh, I get it, I get it. And so once I got it, I was able to do it. So let me just think. So I sold the screenplay, was it 2 years ago? Getting confused what year we're in. Maybe so last year was 2020. 2019 was when I sold the book. So I think it was a year before that I sold the screenplay. And then figure 5 years ago was when I started. So that's kind of the time frame.
So, Melissa, anything?
I have one more question then, Arlene. So when you started doing this research and talking to your mom and all this, did you know you were going to write a book, or were you just doing it because you were so interested in it?
I did not know I was going to write a book. I just it's one of those things in your life, like other than my children, I was like, I was meant to do this. I did not know. And it was good having my cousin because he kept me going. He would send me stuff. And it was when he's the one that sent me that clip from 1939. I was like, I'm gonna make this into a movie.
And that's our mother's nephew.
Yeah.
Is Leslie's talking about the cousin. That's her, her nephew.
Yeah. Had any of you heard about this period before?
No.
Other than Gary?
My husband did. I asked him today before we came, and he had, but he's a historian. He's really big into it. Wait a minute, Arlene had raised her hand.
Yeah, I have a couple things. Number one, the first thing that I'm thinking about is, when was your Uncle Harry born? How old was he?
1915, I believe.
1915. So around that time, he was very much surrounded by the numbers, the Jewish mafia. I mean, that all was very present, that having to be tough guys to get along in that environment. I've done some genealogy in our family in the Baltimore area and have found that that was a very big exposure point there as well. I don't know about the Minutemen kind of concept, but I do know in terms of the toughness and that kind of gang, that type of thing was present. The question that I have, though, really takes away from what you've done, but and focuses more on what you've learned. And through the extensive research that you have done and thinking about the way our society is today, what insights have you gleaned that we in America should really be looking at? I mean, you mentioned something about the presence of the radio, and that kind of triggered for me the way social media has impacted what has transpired around here as one factor. But I'm sure there are other insights you have, and I'm going to mute because of the clock that's going off.
No, it's a brilliant question, and I'd say at the very simplest, answer is, this when complacency happens, when it even happened to us before the pandemic. I think our world got complacent and not just in this category, but in everything, that you just take things for granted, and it's really hard to be aware. So one lesson I took away, and I try to do it myself, is I tell myself now, I'm not going to be complacent. If I see something I don't believe in, if I want to say something, I want to be able to say it, and make sure that I'm trying to educate not only America, but like I have a friend in India who he's like, they don't even know Hitler. They don't study Hitler there. So this is like a bigger worldwide thing. The other thing that is so, so hard, and this year we probably were all challenged with it, is where does freedom of speech start and stop? And, you know, the very nice answer is, you know, it shouldn't be defensive. It should be, you should, the purpose of it, it should be to make people think and to challenge, but to listen to each other. And that's not what happens. But it's a very hard line. And, you know, there's that old, you know, when is it okay to punch a Nazi? And one thing too that is so clear to me after writing this book is that this did not happen so long ago. I mean, my mom lived through it. Our moms, our grandmothers we probably still all know people. And to think that it couldn't happen again and that we would have to maybe become more militant about it is, I hope that doesn't happen. But I think, you know, it's fresh and it's delicate. And I think we don't even probably, I shouldn't assume, you guys, but, you know, in other parts of the world, there's a worldwide extremist right thing going on. In our country, it's often focused around the immigrants that are close to us. In other parts of the world, it's focused on immigrants that are closer to the European countries. And there's an extreme right that does not like that and does not like the thought of whites losing power. So.
Randy, did you want to say something?
I first want to tell you that this has been a stellar program, unbelievable. I think we all learned so much, and I could sit and listen to you for hours and not talk, believe it or not. But I also want to tell you that I know you know, but you are so lucky to have your mother, and at her age to still be of sound mind, that she can recall this. Although if she had Alzheimer's, she probably would have recalled this stuff better than what she had for lunch. But that being said, it's kind of like it was meant to be. That, you know, and did you record your conversations with her?
I have a couple, yeah, and I have a couple talking to my kids, and so,
yeah.
And that would be one of my messages, like, if your mom is around or for your kids, record, because when you're younger, you don't necessarily care or understand some of what's important, but we are so lucky. And Don and I did debate whether to have my mom on here today, but we said she would just go on and talk and talk and talk, but the next one.
And my parents told me everything, and I'm a native Washingtonian, and I mean, I'm sorry I didn't record it, because I remember parts of it that I heard over and over again, but there are parts that I wished I had recorded because I can't get them all straight in my goofy head. So, but I want to thank you, and I want you to thank your mother, because without her, this wouldn't be possible. So kind of like amazing. It's just amazing.
So, and I think we recorded it, so Donna's going to show, Donna will show it to her too. So thank you so much.
Okay, let's take one more question. Oh,
I have to, but I thank you again.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, Melissa and Donna, you feel free to give my email to anyone, and you guys are welcome to reach out to me. And when we need extras in the movie, we'll put it all in.
Okay. So you have one thing on the chat. Gary Goldberg asked when the audio book will be available, and then Carol, you can wrap us up.
Gary, that is my my stress of the day, because I have all the 4 narrators ready to go. As you heard, my daughter I don't know, Gary, if you were on at the beginning, my daughter did this incredible song for it. So I'm going to shoot for, right now I'm saying May 31st, but you know how that goes. But hopefully around late May, early summer. Why are
And
you?
do you know who the publisher is going to be
My
for that?
publisher called
No, for the audiobook.
Yeah, they have the rights, unfortunately, because they take a lot
He's
of.
asking you who?
Morgan James Publishing.
Okay, thanks.
Mhm.
Okay, Carol, one more question and.
Oh, I just need.
We're going to do a drawing for a free book.
Yeah.
I just needed a brief understanding. This is the first screenplay you have ever done?
Yes. Yes.
First screenplay, okay. And you sold the screenplay, then wrote the book?
Yes.
Okay, but you are the executive producer?
Yes, that was part of the negotiation, yeah.
So then do you keep the rights to the characters as well, or any royalties or anything that comes down the road?
I think it's my producer and I, if as long as any deals he makes, if he keeps, then that would be, because we share whatever deals we make. So why are you thinking of Newark Minutemen action figures or?
No, a very close friend of ours is a screenwriter, did Karate Kid, Taken, Walk in the Clouds. And so we talk with him every Friday. And I wanted to share with him this exciting
Well, I would love to talk to him because of COVID. We're not locked into anybody yet. So if he's interested, would love to talk to him.
Anything related to Judaism, it's all about all this stuff. So yeah.
What's his name?
Robert Mark Kamen.
Robert Mark Kamen.
Yeah, he'll live the rest of his life on, wax off. Let me tell you. One little
Great.
And
let me just put, oh, he's in California. And let me just say, in the book, Esther's our mother. So that's where that name comes from.
Yeah. There's a lot of nods to Yael's father is Joseph and our uncle was Joseph. So I do a lot of nods to people in our family.
Okay, we need your website.
Oh, do you want to write that? It's the name of the book, newarkminutemen.com.
Oh, okay.
You want to put that in the whatever, everybody, the notes or whatever you call that? I don't know how to do it. The
chat.
The chat.
See if I can figure this out myself. Chat.
But it's Newark, as in Newark, New Jersey, Minutemen.com.
Leslie, I hope that we will have an opportunity maybe to meet you in person when you're in town visiting with Donna.
I hope so. So Leisure World, where my mom lives, they're holding a spot for me as soon as it's real. So you guys can all
we'll come to Leisure World. No, maybe I'll have something at my house. How's that? After COVID.
That would be great.
There you go, newarkminutemen.com.
Did I do that right?
Yes, exactly.
This has been absolutely amazing. I mean, I have questions, a whole page full of questions, which maybe we'll have coffee someday.
Yes.
Okay. And seriously, email me if any of you all happen to have pictures of people from back then that may have been involved. I'll definitely put it up. So we're all friends now, friends and family.
Yep. Sisters.
Yes.
So did Leslie was going to donate a book, a signed book to the winner? Is that what you were going to do?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I have all your names in this thing. Okay, here we go. Donna K. Fritz.
Oh, good.
Great.
So we'll figure out.
So Melissa, will you send me the information to get it to Donna?
Yep.
Okay, great.
Or if it's whatever, you can send it to me. You can send it to her.
you. Okay.
Yeah, and I can
But
get it to
I
Donna.
need Donna's whole name and all that.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to personalize it.
Okay, great.
Okay. Well, thank you both so much. I mean, this has been a really, really special program. And I'm, you know, anybody that didn't come tonight, they really missed a lot.
Thank you. And Donna, thank you so much for.
Oh, no, thank you.
Thank
you. Thank you.
And thank you, Melissa, for hosting.
Thank you.
Oh, hi, Rachel.
Hi, Donna.
Yes, Melissa, great job.
It was wonderful.
Thanks.
All right.
I have to figure out how to stop recording.
Great meeting you all.
Do you want to?